Hello and welcome to the Sidekick Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm here speaking to Matt Halstead, one of the co-creators of Sidekick, and Matt also runs a small consultancy company called Noctis in London, as well as doing a part-time PhD in quantum chemistry. Matt, thank you for coming onto the show and sharing your experiences with us.
Thanks for having me, Michael, and thanks for hosting, as always.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. So our goal with these one-to-one episodes is to have an honest, open conversation about mental health and well-being. So thank you for agreeing to do that, and which hopefully is going to give people some insight into what tools and techniques are available to help people. We really want to normalize and encourage conversations about mental health and well-being, and ultimately help listeners realize that the way they might be feeling is absolutely normal, and lots of others experience it. That's what we've kind of set out to do with these, and you guys ultimately had the idea of these one-to-one conversations. So yeah, that's our aim.
Yeah, and I think these conversations are important. A lot of conversations often goes on in our head. So yeah, let's get talking. As you can see, I'm slightly closed off. I get a bit nervous about talking about this stuff. So yeah, I'm up for it. It's taken me about a couple of weeks to get up for it, but I'm up for it.
Let's do it. Okay, so can you start by talking through your experiences with mental health?
Yeah, for sure. So and this is something that I haven't, people probably who know me can probably guess and understand, but nothing that I've really ever said before. That I have a very bad, very unhealthy relationship with food, and for a long period, exercise as well. It was very dominant in my life from the ages of 13 through to about 27, 28. I'm 34 now, so it's a long old time. A lot of those thoughts and habits started early, especially when, you go through puberty and your brain is adapting very fast, and by the time you reach your kind of 20s, that's when your brain is starting to kind of solidify in its kind of routines and habits, and basically makes things very hard to unpick. And yeah, what I've come through and taken a long time to manage, I'd never say get over it, but manage it, is to kind of really kind of start to unpick some of those really deep-seated habits, especially around eating. If I'm very honest, the thought of eating dominates a lot of my life. I should be out there thinking about work or or like meeting up with friends and stuff like this, but if I perceive myself to eat the wrong thing or whatever it is, then it can lead to a complete kind of dominant voice in my head saying various pretty bad, nasty things to myself, which I acknowledge isn't healthy. But I think over the time I really want to do something about it, and have done a lot about it, and now I feel like I'm much more in control. And this is kind of like, that kind of journey is what I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah. So when did that start, and what kind of made you think, this, everybody enjoys food and things like that, but excuse me, when did you first think, I need to kind of look a bit deeper here and think maybe I need to address it?
Yeah, to be honest, it's only in the last 5 years. I really didn't realize it was that unhealthy. When I started, so age 13, I was, I moved into like everyone do, you move into secondary school, and I'm a small guy. I'm now only like 5'7". I think actually I'm probably 5'6", but I claim I'm 5'7".
It's the hair.
The hair, or maybe even 5'5". I'm small, and I was very sporty, love sport, but at the same time, like that, it always starts in childhood, in the playground. That's what I always believe. I wasn't very sure of myself. I wouldn't say I was very confident. I wouldn't necessarily say I was one of the popular kids. I was good at sport, and I found that doing well at sport made the popular kids kind of go, all right, Matt, yeah, you're okay. Yeah. And I remember very distinctly a very strong conversation with one of my teachers, and he was like, he was my kind of rugby coach, and he was like, Matt, if you want to be good and beat everyone else, you're going to have to do 100 press-ups a night and eat well and train hard. And at that time, the need to do well and fit in and be popular was very overwhelming. And from the age of 13, I have been, from the age of 13, I don't do anymore, thankfully. But I started doing obsessively press-ups every night, sit-ups every night. It's all I'd do. I'd come home, screw my homework. I'd just do press-ups in my room. My mum did probably think it was quite weird. And I was doing 100, 200, 300 press-ups a night, sit-ups as well. I then bought some own weights because someone said, have you tried some weights? Bought some weights, and I thought, okay, I'll start doing this, start doing that. And the funny thing is that like people start noticing a difference. When you're 14, you're 15, your body's changing as well. You really start, but people are like, oh, Matt, yeah. You're looking all right, or you're playing sport. I played, I played a lot of rugby, and they're like, okay, you're getting better, and that just reinforces it. So 200 press-ups turns into 500 press-ups. Then as soon as I'm allowed access into the school gym, my word, the tidal wave just opens. I've just got this playpen in front of me where I'm just like, I will do every single machine and I will lift everything as hard as I can. But fundamentally, what it's driven by is the same need, the need to kind of like validate myself, be validated by other people. And then at the same time, I didn't really have a worry about food at that time because I'm doing so much exercise.
Yeah.
And then I started, I think part of like some pre-season, they were like, just make a record of everything you eat. You should be eating like this. I think like some dietitian came in and said, you should be eating like this. So I started making a little food diary of what I ate. I've actually still got it. And you realize, especially as you start to progress, and let's say at one stage, I was never, ever going to be a professional, but I really wanted to try and be the best that I could try and be. And that involved getting bigger. So how do you get bigger? You eat more. So I started to eat, and I've always had a good appetite. Like, I think it runs through my family. And started to eat and eat and eat. Without much thought about it because I was doing so much exercise. And I'm talking, I kept a food and exercise diary relentlessly. And I'm talking, you do 500 press-ups a day, 500 sit-ups, 2 runs, play sport, and go to the gym whilst doing my work as well.
Wow.
And at the time, I was just like, no, I love this. At the time I was doing well at school as well in terms of like academic stuff. So life was good, in my opinion. It was great. I was, you were doing lots of things. You were doing well at things. You're really, really achieving. And then when I went on to university, I think one thing I've really always struggled with, I think why school was quite good for me, was a lot of structure. I could, my lessons were easily compartmentalized. It's like, now's the time to study. Then I got my sport time. Now's the time to do sport. Then I get home. I'm like, right, now is homework time. Then I'm going to go for a run. Everything was nice and easily structured, all structured for me. Yeah. Then when I went to uni, like, that is when, you've got to put your own structure in place. And I had no idea. So all I did was I do my lectures and work hard for them. But because at university, there's a lot of free time, I just trained and ate. And I then got a lot into taking a lot of supplements. I spent probably the vast majority of my student loan on supplements.
Yeah, they're expensive.
They're very expensive. It also goes to show the power of the marketing behind it as well.
Yeah.
I never really learned to cook, which I now have, which turns out was probably a good solution. It's much cheaper as well. And then it turned into taking more not illegal supplements, but more supplements on a bit in the grey. At the same time, whilst eating more getting bigger. There was a culture, especially within. I was still, you go to uni and suddenly you were kind of not big. You weren't the big guy at school, but you could kind of hold your own. And suddenly you're kind of dwarfed by, at the time, men mountains. So it just started again and just got more extreme. And I ended up, starting to do a lot of powerlifting, which was facilitated more by eating. The bigger you are, the more you lift. All I would think about is lifting, frankly. I'll be very honest. I didn't think about much else.
Yeah.
But then again, it's reinforced. The people I was hanging around with were, if you lift well, you are validated. They're like, Matt, yeah, awesome, great lift. Oh, Matt, he's a guy who can do that. He's a guy who can do that. But again, it's about the kind of that my deep need to kind of fit in and like feel popular.
Yeah.
Well, not feel popular, just like feel like people like me for a certain reason.
Yeah, your status came from how good you were at lifting, and
absolutely right. And then it takes over, like, because these and that's what I've realized, these habits are forming and no one's checking them. I'm in an environment where people are celebrating it. And I think this is what I want to, come on to talk about, like the celebration of it. Like, I realized that I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed. But also it was a way for me to control my life, which felt very, very uncertain. And you can't, as soon as you move through, basically when no one checks it, but then again, when people did check it, I just thought they were stupid. Like, my mom would come home and I went to uni 11 stone, and I came back from uni 16 stone. So I'd put on, terrible maths, 4 stone.
5 11
stone.
11
it's about 4.5, 5 stone in a few years. And I would go home and my mum would do a week's shopping for when I come back from uni, and I'd eat it in a day, the whole thing gone, which obviously can cause a little bit of conflict because I'm not the one that's paying for it.
Were you eating kind of everything, or was it like chicken and protein and?
You're right. It wasn't everything, but even though I researched everything about food and supplements, I knew everything. I knew every calorie. I was basically a Weight Watchers app. But I mean, I now know that I just didn't seem to know the right things, even though I thought I did.
Yeah.
And it's still now, I've still got kind of labels in my head for what a bad meal is. And frankly, it's not a bad meal. I know that now, but it's still in my head. That's a bad meal. And I've got to fight those feelings that kind of overcome me at the time. I think because it was such a dominant part of my life, like, I felt like in order to try and achieve any form of like moderation, I always go back to my grandmother. She was like, everything in moderation. But for me, like, moderation was a knife edge. It felt like 5 or 6 raging forces pulling in every direction, and all I'm doing is on a tightrope, just making sure those forces are in check.
Yeah.
And it was the exercise, the food, or probably underpinned by a lot of lack of confidence in myself, uncertainty about the world. Where do I fit in? What am I doing? Why the hell am I here? I've always been quite a deep thinker, so that probably didn't help as well. So got to the kind of end of uni, then went into the world of work again. Had no idea what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, and carried on the same way. I then realized that I didn't want to be big anymore, because basically, what's the point? I'd reached the peak of what I could do in sport and was very happy with that.
Yeah.
And wanted to go back down again, but the food thing was pretty powerful. Keep on eating. I'd go out for dinner to, let's say, for a pizza restaurant, and I'd have a main course to start, 2 main courses, 2 pizzas for main course, and then, chocolate fudge cake for afters, and think that was okay because
in
I
your
was,
mind you were trying to get the calories.
yeah,
When I suppose initially you were trying to get the calories to fuel
yeah,
you, and that continued after you needed the
yeah,
fuel, I guess.
yeah, exactly. And then it goes the other way. When I decide to go back the other way, I like, fine, right, how do I do this? Right, well, I'm just going to restrict everything. So I was eating uh, between 800 and 1,000 calories a day whilst doing the same level of exercise. I take appetite suppressants to stop it. I take energy boosters, which are pretty great, to be honest. Um, um, to kind of like give yourself the energy whilst tamping down the kind of the pressures of your appetite. Um, and then I got into. I've always been a very kind of keen runner, not in terms of like anything competitive, but it's kind of my space to kind of chill out. And I got. I read a book which was, I think it was called like Ultramarathon Man, and I read it, and it was like, the person in it just ran and just ran and just ran. He just got up one day and just ran, and he didn't really know why. He just ran.
Hmm.
And so I put the book down one day, whilst I was at work. So I was probably about 22, 23, and I thought, okay, this sounds like a good idea. I'm just gonna see how far I can run. And that will also help in my mind, because what validated it is because, hold on, if I run for 2 hours, I've burnt 1,000 calories, 1,500 calories. Okay, cool. This seems logical to me. This works because I'm only putting in 1,000.
Hmm.
So I ended up started to run. So the first day I went out, and bear in mind, up until this point, I've never run anything more than a half marathon. So I ran half marathon at school, so just over 13 miles.
Hmm.
That takes just under a couple of hours for like a very average runner like me. And the first day I went out, I left the house in the rain at 7 p.m. I got back at midnight, and I ran all over London. Um, it made me think. I was like, hold on, I can run. I like running. Quite good at running. So there it is again. It's like, okay, I'm quite good at it. Well, actually, maybe I could do this. Maybe people will like me better for it. Some of the weird thoughts that go through your head, and
Yeah.
but the problem is, at the same time, when you're running for that amount of time, you've got to fuel yourself. So suddenly you're like, okay, actually, I can't live off 800 calories a day. I'm gonna have to start whacking in the food again. So I started running, and I'd 2 or 3 times a week I'd run for 3 or 4 hours. And then I went on holiday and came back, and no, actually, I went on holiday, came back from a night out. It was a drum and bass night. The good thing about some of these energy supplements is that it makes you dance for quite a long time. And I came back and booked myself into a ultramarathon. And I'd never done an ultramarathon. I've run for like 3-4 hours at a time. And it was in 6 weeks' time. And I was like, no, I'm going to do this. Just going to do it. So I, again, launched into kind of an obsessive regime of planning of how am I going to do this? How am I going to achieve this? And started wolfing down the food, bringing up your energy, started running a lot, started lifting in a special way to make sure that I felt strong. And and this was the kind of the epitome. Like, I turned up 6 weeks later, having trained, but more, it wasn't about training, it was more about, can I actually do this?
Hmm.
So my thought was like, an ultramarathon is anything longer than a marathon, and I started with a double marathon. So 58, what was it? My maths is terrible. 26, 40, 52 miles.
Yeah.
I say 52 because I actually ran 58 because I got lost. But
All in one go.
yeah, one
Wow.
day. And so went to turned up on my own, drove down, had dinner the night before, a couple of pizzas as per usual. carb up, they call it. And it turns to terrible advice. Don't do that. And it was the hottest day of the summer, so it's 32 degrees. The start line, it was down in Kent, and it was 8 laps of a cross-country course. And the thing with laps is that, yeah, it can play with your mind. Yeah. So I started at 6 a.m. And just started running. Now, I had not researched anything about ultramarathons at all. So, and I was like, I'm just going to run until I can't run because anymore. Turns out that's not necessarily the best way to do your first one. You kind of stop, start, conserve your energy. So I ran non-stop for 9 hours. In the heat, I've still got the scars on my shoulders from the sunburn. The emotions that you go through it are pretty savage, especially when you've got a long time to think on your own. So that the whole run took 13 hours and 40 odd minutes. Every lap, and whatever the laps were, 8-9 miles, is a roller coaster of emotions, because there's about 40 or 50 people who turn up, but if you spread that across 52 miles and in laps, you don't really see many people.
No.
Too often. So I just ran and just ate, shoveled it down, but got to the end and finished, and did it in 13 odd hours, which was just a little, more of a little jog, little trundle. But the back of that, I came, and this is it's typical me. I got in the car, like I didn't have a shower. I just walked to the car. I sprinted I remember the guy, the coordinator of the run, saying, he was like, I just looking into the distance, and I just saw this mad kind of tiny lump sprinting towards me, and there was some elation in me that I was just about to finish. And for running for 52, 55 miles, I sprinted the last 300 meters and collapsed over the line. And then obviously, like, you're kind of like, right, what do I do now? I got up, drank my kind of recovery stuff, and got in the car and drove to the petrol station because I needed petrol. But turns out if you don't warm down after running 52 miles, you can't actually walk. So it took me 10 minutes to pay because I couldn't walk. And then went to stay at my friend's house. I couldn't walk for a week. But I then got the bug for it. You tell your friends and all that. They're like, "Oh, mate, that's awesome. You're going to do another one?" And I was like, "Yeah, sounds good." So all in all, I did. And the age of, when I was 22, 23, I ran 4 ultramarathons. First one was the one I just described. The second one was the same one I just described at night in winter. So you'd run it from 6 p.m. and I finished at 2 a.m. I ran it with a head torch. I'd been training quite a lot. So I, did much better than I would have necessarily hoped, and kept up with some of the kind of some of the front runners. I remember getting in at 2 a.m. to a motel nearby. I think it was a Premier Inn, on my own, and collapsing on the bathroom floor, puking everywhere. Calling a friend of mine who was in a club down in London, just going, I've just finished that. They were pissed out of their minds. Oh, great, that'd be awesome. Can't wait for the next one, which is not really what I wanted to hear. No. Woke up the next day, shoved in the food, and went on to the next one. And the kind of in between those, I was getting up every Saturday morning at 4 a.m. I live in London, so if anyone's familiar with the tube lines, I used to live down in Bermondsey, like London Bridge, around there. My mum used to live up in High Barnet, top of the Northern Line. I used to run up to hers from Bermondsey. I used to eat breakfast with her about 8, have a chat, and then I used to run back. So I'd get back about 10. I'd run 32 miles. I'd then go out for the day, eat. Then I'd go out clubbing. I'd be on the bus home, night bus, about 4 a.m. Having gone to the kebab house, the chicken shop, whatever, shoveling in food. And then my last one, which is when I realised that probably something was up, was I ran from, the race was London to Brighton, which is, I don't know, 50, I think it's again 52, 53 miles. I had played a rugby match the weekend before, the full 80 minutes. I had power lifted in the week. I'd then gone up to some family up north on the Saturday. The run was on the Sunday. I drank too much. I tend to do things in extremes. Got the train back on Saturday night, got in about 9 p.m, 10 p.m, booked a cab to take me to Greenwich Park, which is where it started. So I booked the cab for 5 a.m. Went to sleep. Didn't have my alarm. Didn't hear my alarm. So the cab woke me up. Obviously, before running a big race like that, you need food. So I grabbed a banana. I had half a kilo of dairy milk in my backpack, a sack of water, and I put on a vest and running shorts. And when I mean a vest, I mean like a singlet. And didn't check the weather. It was freezing and raining. So I turned up to Greenwich Park on my own with a banana, half a kilo of dairy milk, in shorts and a vest, standing in the rain. Everyone else looked very keen. And I looked around, I was like, I was hungover at this point as well. I was like, this is going to be really, 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 really long day. But then, as I did at that stage, just got on with it. Like as some of my friends always say, Matt, just get busy, just do it, just get your head down and do it. One foot after the other, just get busy and do it. And I ended up running it non-stop again for 9-10 hours through cross country. You had an Ordnance Survey map and a compass. Turns out I'm very bad at reading a map. I did it with a pack, like with 3 or 4 people who I kind of met along the way. Helps when you don't know where you're going, so I followed them. They also didn't know where they were going. So the whole run was 53 miles. I ended up running, according to the guy's pedometer, 61 miles. Got to the South Downs. Got at about 10 p.m. Got lost in the forest. And it was like a kind of, if anyone's ever seen the film Blair Witch, in some of these woods, there's arrows, and you'd come up to the arrow, and basically, it's like, right, this is a big thick wood, this is the way to go. And I kept on coming back to the same arrow. I did it 3 or 4 times, and I was like, oh God, this is mental. This is like someone's trying to tell me something. Like I'm definitely not going in a circle, but I kept on coming back to the same arrow, and ended up getting picked up. Not finishing the race, which is immensely disappointing after the after actually wanting to do it, and also the kind of the last few days, the week before, kind of got to the point where I said to myself, I was in the car on the way home, I hitched a lift on the way back. I was in work for 9 a.m. the next day, couldn't walk, and I was kind of like, Matt, why the hell are you doing this? Why are you running? Why are you eating so much? Why are you lifting? Like, what's up? And it's that started I suppose, a period of asking why a lot, of introspection. And it means you start questioning everything. And I questioned everything and realized that everything that I was doing was motivated by some pretty bad feelings and motivation, pretty unhealthy ones. I probably, like a few months after, I lost my job. Got a new one quickly, so that was okay. But made me really think about, okay, what do you actually want to do with your life? And people say you have a midlife crisis. I certainly had a quarter life crisis. The more you think, the more you try and understand what's going on inside. Without help and support, you don't really know what you're doing. So you can easily spiral into some pretty dark places quite quickly. And without going into it, to dark places, so at the same time, I started to think, okay, I wanted to help a little bit more and like maybe understand a little bit more. So I became a Samaritans volunteer. Samaritans, if people don't know, their primary mission is to stop suicide or to lower the rates of suicide in the UK. But the actual conversations you have with people are not necessarily always linked to suicide. It's just linked to a lot of people, a lot of unhealthy people who are feeling who have emotional struggles, emotional issues. But if there's one thing to kind of bring out how I was feeling and the thoughts that I were having, was like one of my supervisors always said that, Matt, often a Samaritan's volunteer is just a caller on a good day. And that kind of summed me up a bit. So I moved back to my auntie's house, and it got pretty low, and then realized that I think realizing that there's two choices here. There's a bad one, or there's a good one.
Yeah.
And I kind of said to myself, I was like, oh, actually, when you boil down everything, and you boil down all of life's like shit going on, excuse my language, stuff going on, and friends and needs and whatever, and it comes down to, do you want to live? Do you actually want to do it? And I decided to. And when I decided to, I made myself a promise. I was like, okay, I promise that I will live. And that's basically it. That's where it started. That's where my upward journey started. That's where I hit what I would consider, for me, rock bottom. And then it was a process of trying to understand myself and rebuild. And I still have that promise in myself. It's like, especially when some of those thoughts can come back, because they do come back. They don't often disappear. You always go back to it. Matt, you made yourself a promise. Don't break it. Simple as that.
Yeah.
A promise to a friend is very powerful, but promise to yourself is, if you break it, then who the hell are you? You got no idea,
Yeah.
And so I started to explore myself a little bit more. I'm one for not reaching out for help. I like doing things myself. Probably not very healthy. I did seek help, professional help. However, that was not very long lasting. I struggled with the inaccessibility of it. A lot of it was money, cost. It's not affordable. And when you are newly self-employed, not wanting to go back to your old life, money's very tight. I'm cycling all over London. I did a lot of tutoring, because, quite like I said, I was all right at school, kind of academically, so I could tutor people. It was all cash in hand work, but that cash would go and pay some of my rent to my auntie, or then I moved over back to my mum's for a little bit, to my mum. And then you haven't got much money to pay for, so why the hell am I going to pay 75 quid an hour when I'm gonna, I can try and do something about it. And that might have been not necessarily the best choice. I could have maybe shortened the journey a little bit, but I didn't. And I kind of stuck by that. And I got into a habit, like you mentioned at the beginning. Like I do a part-time PhD in science, quantum chemistry, and for me, I've always been a scientist. I've ended up doing a lot of different things, but what makes sense to me is experimentation, and experimenting on your life and working out what makes you happy, what makes you don't, what makes you sad, what makes you angry, what makes you frustrated, are all valid experiments. Right? You could argue they're not rigorous, they're not peer reviewed, and they're certainly not they may be replicable, but it gives you insight about yourself.
Yeah.
And I certainly started to realize what made me tick, what made me didn't, and made it very clear that one of the things that I needed to face up to was firstly that kind of need for compulsive exercise, which actually at the time, because I just run that very long run, I was exhausted mentally. So I was like, yeah, I'm just going to drop this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do all the weights and the lifting. I'm exhausted. And it was a mental exhaustion. It was, I am tired of doing this. I can't, there's no internal motivation anymore. I'm doing it for other people. I'm not doing it for me. But the one thing that stays around is the food thing. That's, I mean, food is a very internal process. Like exercise is an internal process, but especially lifting and running and stuff, it has its benefits, but it's very external. You actively go and do it, go into a gym, whatever it is. Whereas eat is a very kind of foundational thing in your very own existence. And when you've got a compulsion to eat, and that's the thing that brings you control or allows you to feel like you've got a sense of control, then when you feel out of control, you try to control your eating. Well, I tried to control my eating, which made me, just constantly think about it all the time. Everything I ate, what I was doing, it just brought me a sense of satisfaction in a pretty dark time. However, when you look at it, it's probably, arguably that could be one of the roots of that kind of general sense of kind of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
But it's a very hard thing to break, and I have not broken it. Definitely not. But I have managed it, and I've managed it much better now. I actually struggled with it up until 2 years ago when my wife got pregnant, which is a great thing. I was still, thoughts of food and how I'm eating dominated. I've done every diet under the sun. Turns out not a particularly healthy way to live either. But my wife also is an excellent cook and enjoys cooking. I started to learn a bit more about cooking, and I'm certainly not the best cook now, but I can do it. And I realized that you can control what you eat better by making it yourself, because you know what goes in it.
Yeah.
I wish someone had told me that when I was 13, 14. Things might have turned out slightly different. But then again, I'm proud of what I've done and achieved and what I've been through, even though it was motivated by negative things. But then when she got pregnant, she had something called gestational diabetes, which is a temporary form of diabetes caused by the placenta of the baby. And therefore, as a result, she's put on a very strict diabetic diet. And that was all managed by diet rather than taking any pills or anything like that. So we went down to the hospital, the NHS dietitian, who we sat in a group and how to learn how to eat. And I suddenly thought, actually, because at the time Lent was coming up, and I quite, I'm not particularly religious myself, but I find Lent a really not good period to kind of cut out a bad habit.
Yeah.
So for Lent, I was like, okay, right, you've got gestational diabetes, Lent's coming up, I will give up sugar with you. or I will restrict my sugar with you. I mean, at the time, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a great thing. It's another diet. I love it. And within 3-4 months, I had gone from, I'd lost 1.5 stone, 2 stone. But the one, I was more positive in my life. And secondly, I didn't feel like I was trying to do anything. I didn't feel like I was on a diet, which was the first time in my life I felt like that. I was feeling healthy. I was eating what I wanted, but obviously in the context of not eating as much sugar. I realized how much sugar is in food, and it is everywhere. I mean, why company? Well, I think we all know why companies add lots of sugar to things, but why they do it is it's scandalous.
Yeah.
It's I go as far to say that it's, it feeds UK wide obesity. It feeds negativity. It's corrosive. You don't need that stuff in your diet.
No.
And I'm very strong about that because I saw a very positive benefit. And what I've realized is, rather than, and this is how I manage it now with my eating, is for me now, as long as I have a meal or I look what I've eaten in the day, and I tot up, or I have a little think about, okay, how much sweet stuff you have, how much chocolate or stuff like that. And if the answer is none, well, I just realize it just doesn't matter what I'm eating. Of course, it matters in terms of like, have you had a kebab or a fish and chips or whatever it is. But if you're home cooking your food, and you're not putting a lot of sugar in your body, you feel a lot better and you feel healthy.
Yeah.
But you also don't feel like you're on a diet. So my word, if someone had told me that when I was 13, 14, like I used to, there was a time in my life where I would, on a Saturday night, eat 17 chocolate bars and 5 cookies. But, and that was when I knew they weren't particularly good for me, but I just didn't realize how bad. So now I've started to manage it. And this is something that's just come over a period of time. Like, I read a book on the brain several years ago. My grandmother gave it to me, and in the book it said something I'll never forget. The brain is like a parliament, and there are many voices, but it's important to listen to all those voices because they're all valid. They're there for a reason, but you don't have to act on those voices. So, and that made a lot of sense to me. Might not make a lot of sense to anyone else, but so in the context of compulsion to exercise, rather than just going out and doing it, just say, okay, why is my body telling me it wants to go out and exercise? And often the reason isn't it wants to exercise. It's like, I'm worried about something in 3 days, and I'm just trying to kind of comfort myself. Same thing with food. Obviously there's a proper pang for hunger, but if I've eaten 3 meals a day and it's good, and they're good food, it got low sugar, I'm cooking it myself, then what's this voice telling me? And again, it's never about food.
Yeah.
These things are never about the things that you think about. And this is one of my insights. Now, I'm not necessarily always sure what the voices say, but what I do now, and this is the nice visualization, so we come onto your kind of tools and tips, and I always say, I give them a slap. And if someone pipes up too loud and they're saying either something food related, exercise, or something even darker, as I referred to back earlier, I just look at that fictitious person in my mind, and I'm just like, no, sit down. Like, I'm the speaker here.
Yeah.
Like, and give them a slap. And I've always, there's this phrase that I can't remember what it was. It's got the imagery of your brain attached to a horse and cart, where the horse is your brain and you're the person on top.
Yeah.
And if your brain does something you don't want to do, just give it a whip and say, no, that's not on.
Yeah.
And it's weird thinking about that, but it's really, really, really helped me.
Yeah. Because you've been able to find a way to control your thoughts, negative thoughts and compulsive thoughts.
Absolutely. And then when you start looking into some of the kind of more ancient practices, even the more modern ones, Buddhism, then looking at mindfulness or stuff like that, like they're saying the same things, like watch your thoughts, observe them, suspend judgment. That's a really hard one, because obviously you're trying to suspend judgment on yourself, and these are very powerful forces that are kind of raging in you. And in a moment of like, when as I call it, when the storms hit, that's when you can't reflect, you can't do all your things in your toolkit, because you are completely inundated with these things. It feels like you're in the eye, you are in the, not the eye of the storm, you're in the middle of a hurricane and you can't do anything about it. How do you do it? So yeah, that's my very, very long-winded journey, to be honest.
So have you now, looking back, been able to kind of pick apart the elements of all of that was going on, to sort of compartmentalize, like, okay, it was a lot to do with making friends happy? It sounds like there were so many elements. There was the part where friends were saying to you, okay, what's your next challenge? And you were kind of wanting to get that booked in to sort of tick that box. And then there was you wanting to make yourself happy and do things that you wanted to do. And then there was the status thing. So have you kind of, I guess, 10 years on, been able to look back and sort that into the various boxes, or is it just such a mixture of things? It's quite hard to understand.
It comes back to that, the brain is a parliament.
Yeah.
They're all valid voices. I mean, who doesn't want status? Who doesn't need themselves validated? Who doesn't have compulsions?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I need to act on them. Sometimes they are powerful and sometimes they take over. But do you have a plan in place to be able to, or have you designed your life in such a way that those voices are quietened for a period of time?
Yeah.
And when a voice shouts at you a lot, you know that you can tell it's a bad habit. So the key that I found is actually, okay, well, if I get into some decent habits, then I'm going to have more positive voices and negative voices.
Yeah.
I know I am constantly think I'm sounding like I've got voices in my head, which I do.
Everybody does. Everybody has their own voice in their head, and it's just saying different things.
And I think I think that's a really key thing. There's a lot of especially in where I grew up, in London, image and physicality was a big part of it. And I mean, God, it's the world over. Looking at you're looking at Instagram, you're looking at advertisers, advertising. It's all about exercising a certain way, eating a certain way, looking a certain way. Like that's very powerful.
Yeah.
And so coming back to your point about, can I pick apart? I was a very uncertain boy in a time where these forces were able to overtake my control of them. I wasn't strong enough to control them.
Yeah.
And I didn't remain strong enough until, when it comes to eating, till 2 years ago. And that was me when I'm 32. So that's, but it still doesn't mean that those voices aren't still there. They are there. They're just quieter because I can manage them.
And you don't have to act on them either at all or in the way that they're suggesting. And I guess when you were younger, you were, and actually we're sort of led to believe we can trust our own mind and our own thoughts and what our body wants to do. And so actually it's not crazy that you would just think, I'm going to act on everything that my mind is telling me to do, because it's probably for the best for me because I want it.
Exactly. And you've touched on, I think you've summarized it way more succinctly than I've done in the last 54 minutes, is can you trust what you're thinking?
Yeah.
That's a big question. My instincts is, and when we talk, and I know at the end we want to talk about kind of tools and tips. I've made a couple of notes myself. I've said trust yourself, but it's often about listening to yourself as well. You do have to trust yourself. Of course you've got to trust yourself, but can you trust every thought that you have? Is it true? Is it valid?
Yeah.
My experience is no. You can't. There's lots of voices which are chirping up for certain reason, but it doesn't mean they need to dominate. They
Right.
need to. There might be a suggested course of action, but I think this is where my study of quantum mechanics helps a lot. Fundamentally, uncertainty is built into the fabric of the universe, and understanding that things are uncertain and you can only control certain things, and there are lots of different outcomes, potential outcomes to lots of different things, and they can be defined in a very rigorous probabilistic way. These voices are just potential routes that you could go down. But when I chose to live and then chose to design my life in a way that would make me feel more positive, then I know I can now look at those voices and listen to those voices in the context of the paths that I want to go down. And I can start to imagine it. Your brain's an incredible thing.
Mm.
It's a prediction machine. You can visualize how things are going to potentially happen. That's how your brain works. It models. And if you listen to these voices and you've got now enough experience and understanding of yourself to go, okay, I'm going to go down that path. Let's just play it out. Let's just see what happens. Let's model it, simulate it a bit. And then you can't think, hold on, that looks like a really bad path. That looks like a really bad idea. And when you can put it in through the lens of your design, because design is foundational. It's the principles to which you exist, the rules that you play by. And it enables you to look at it from a very foundational level and say, okay, these set of voices, these set of choices are not good for me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do them. And unfortunately, and especially when it comes to, with a lot of things around addiction with drugs and alcohol, it's very nice saying that you've got that choice, but the reality is a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
There is a very, very physical element where the body is completely dominating with one voice, and that voice is to crave what they're craving, which is incredibly hard. Which is why I really wanted, to say that my approach is not. It certainly isn't related to, or my experience isn't related to necessarily any addiction, and I never think of it that way, but very strong desires, forces, and compulsions based on fundamental human needs, being validated, status, bit of greed probably in there as well, are very powerful forces, and to be aware of them, I think, is a really key point. And a lot of people think that, especially people who haven't tried it, think things like mindfulness, yoga are quite, a bit out there. But there's a lot to it. If you start to listen to yourself and listen to your voice, suspend judgment about what you're thinking, and are able to do that in a form a habit around that and control that, it's very powerful. And the reality is that everything starts with a thought. And if everything starts with a thought, then essentially you can achieve anything you wanted to achieve within the bounds of the physical parameters of the universe. And that's my belief. And so I certainly went from a state where I was completely disempowered, lacking of confidence, uncertainty, where I'm now much more certain of myself. And am I more in control? Yeah, I'm more in control of myself, but I'm more in control of myself in the context of controlling what I can actually control and acknowledging that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's just part of nature, and that's fine.
Yeah. And I guess understanding that you've gone through all of that, and there is an element of maintenance needed. It's like you were saying, to kind of keep on that track, and you still deal with things, but just knowing how to control it a bit better and maintain it.
You have to work on it. And this is where like we talk about the tools and tips. Well, we want to, we're talking about the tools and tips of what helps. And I've got a list here. Like, these are the things that I do on a regular basis. And it is my toolkit. I know everyone talks about your mental health toolkit, but I know what to do if a voice gets too dominant.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that then. What tips would you, based on your experiences, what tips would you give to someone who's struggling with their mental health and well-being in whatever way, taking into account some of the things we've spoken about?
Well, I I think half of it is kind of like conceptual, and half of it is kind of the proactive things that I do in terms of like the physical things that I can do to kind of to help myself.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is around listening to yourself and understanding yourself. That was the hardest part, deciding to not focus on externalities and focus on internal processes,
Yeah.
and thinking actually everything that happens in the outside world is as a consequence of people's internal thoughts and thoughts, choices, decisions, and therefore actions. So actually, if I wanted to design myself in a way that I was making better actions in the outside world, I've got to start in here.
Yeah.
So I started in there, and I think listen to yourself and understand yourself. Acknowledge that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have issues. Don't be afraid of it. Everyone has them. People who don't are lying, 100%. Talking to others, having conversations like these are with trusted people are important. Trust can extend to friends, family, therapists, well-being consultants, whatever it is. That brings a kind of a perspective and comfort that actually you might not be alone. Other people are going through this, and fundamentally, that's comforting. A big one for me, and I do this in the context of I choose to live, is acknowledge you want to change.
Yeah.
And this is in a lot of the processes that people are going in from some form of of recovery process. There often needs to be an acknowledgement. I mean, you've got to want it, and it's got to be enough of a want. It's got to be a desperate want to not go back to what you were like before. And for me, is that you've got to acknowledge that. You've got to be honest with yourself and say, okay, things aren't right. If I play this out 20, 30 years time, it's going to be a pretty average life. I want a better one.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, great. You've decided you want a better one. Okay, so why do you want a better one? Okay, well, the reasons are obvious, because of what I've thought of and acted, how I've been acting before. But why do I really want to do things? That's an interesting question. And I think understanding why you want to do things is really important. If you could say, someone asked you a question, and you can ask yourself this question: why are you doing this? If you can't come up with yourself with a good reason, then stop doing it,
Yeah.
because it makes no sense. Like, have some sense and some logic in your life, and it doesn't need to be defendable logic, just logic that makes sense to you. Just ask why a lot, and say, okay, are you happy with this decision? And if you're not, then do something about it. I've talked a lot about designing your life. I believe in that a lot. If you understand yourself and you understand what makes you tick, therefore, if your life is put into a little kind of compartments of work, family, relationship, friends, free time, studies, whatever, then it is possible to design your life in a way that you can achieve positivity. Now, of course, that life isn't going to achieve 100% positivity, because that's just unnatural. You need a little bit of negativity to kind of realize you're positive. But you've got, I think, having that balance across lots of different areas of your life is important. So, for example, if someone's being nailed at work, often they're in a pretty bad state unless they thrive off it, because something's out of balance.
Yeah.
And one of the key tools that I use, which it started off as a spreadsheet, is actually now in the Sidekick app, and it's called Life Balance. And what it does is that it enables you to look at the hours in your week or the hours in your day, and create little boxes. So I'm working for 7 hours a day. I'm spending time with my wife and daughter 4 hours a day. I'm sleeping, very important, 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day, whatever it is. And then once you've allocated all of what your kind of regular week looks like, you then rank those by, okay, how positive does it make you feel? Okay, spending time with my family, well, that makes me feel positive. Work, okay, work's pretty average at the moment. It makes me feel a little bit negative. So what you're doing is that you're saying, okay, in my 24-hour day, in my 7-day week, I've got enough positivity in my life to know that at the end of the week, I'm generally going to feel okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do the exercise and look at it and go, okay, I'm really imbalanced or really out of balance. I've got doing 3 or 4 things which actually generally make me feel negative. So I'm feeling negative most of the time. Oh, wow, this is why I'm feeling negative. Okay, so how are you going to change it? And it's difficult. If you've got wife, kids, paying rent, bills, mortgage, whatever, it's very difficult to change stuff, especially when it comes to work. So what I urge people is try and go through this process and decisions before you have come to, before you are in a family situation or have bought a house or are renting in a long term and you're very happy where you are. Like, it's important to try and get this, it's basically important for me to have a quarter life crisis. If you need one, that's okay.
Yeah, if it helps you analyze your life.
Yeah, and take the time to reflect on it. It's okay. Have a break. You don't need to always be moving from one job to the other. If you're able to work at a job, save a little bit of money, and then take a little bit of time off, then take some time off. You might want to go traveling, but do you go traveling and just spend your money on getting drunk every night? Well, yeah, maybe that's what you want to do, but is it a time to reflect, to understand, okay, this is how my last few years have been, how do I want the next few years have been? And I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I think a key one is find a toolkit that works for you. Now, for me, running helps me. Eating very little sugar and eating home cooked meals works for me. I do some breathing exercises when I'm in a bad way. Strangely, they work. A lot of people argue that they don't, but for me, they do. I enjoy a little bit of yoga, nothing too intense. I like the soft stuff. I like lying there. I like candles. I like a bit of scent. And I just like a little bit of breathing, a little bit of stretching. It's non-intense. It's not intense exercise.
Yeah.
I don't need those weights anymore, because those weights don't control me anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the final thing I pulled away is again going back to my grandmother. Always remember, you can only do your best.
Yeah.
And you can only do your best. And I know we're brought up often in a culture where you can always do more and there's always someone better. It's very competitive, but be kind to yourself. You can only do the best you can do. And yeah, push yourself to your limits. I push myself to my limits. It turns out I can run for 15 hours straight. I mean, is that useful in my life? No. I mean, I can also lift 210 kilos. Is that useful in my life? No. I'm not a forklift truck. You see what I mean? Like it seems ridiculous. I look back at my life and go, what on earth were you doing? What's the
Yeah.
point? Makes no sense.
You were just so wrapped up in it, and that was
Yeah.
the most important thing to you at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the final thing is about like moderation doesn't need to be a knife edge. Like if it feels a knife edge, then try to understand why it does feel a knife edge. Understand the forces that are pulling you in the directions. Understand your life balance, and go from there.
Yeah.
That's it.
Perfect. No, thank you. And thank you for being so honest, and because I think what I hope people would take from this and what they find interesting is from the outside, people would have heard that or known you at the time and thought, this is like a physically fit guy. He's smashing all of these ultra marathons. He's loving fitness and bulking and weights. And they wouldn't have known what was going on under the scene, behind the scenes, and what was driving you to do this, and actually were you enjoying it? Maybe some aspects of it, but it was almost this collection of things that were happening that were going to lead you to some kind of burnout. But and there's probably people are experiencing similar things in their own ways, whether they're taking on every piece of work projects that they can do, and they're going to eventually burn out that way. So I think it's a really interesting story, and I hope people identify with it in some way, however small they identify with it.
Thank you. I think the final thing I'd say is, especially when it comes to physical stuff, when you're trying to be bigger or you're eating a certain way, like at the core for me was still a scared little boy, and that scared little boy was still scared age 32.
Yeah.
And he was still 12, 13 years old and very, very frightened. And now kind of accept that, that little boy, I've kind of peeled off all those layers, and I feel like that little boy's grown up a little bit.
We're all a scared little boy or girl in a way. We're just kind of winging it in life, and taking on things, and trying to trying to show that we know what our job is, and we know we've got life fully in control. But actually, we're all just scared little boys and girls. It's a weird line. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you for doing this. Thank you, everybody watching and listening. You can listen and subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. We're everywhere, basically. Any podcast platform. Just search Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories, and we'll pop up.